Apologies again for the quality of the audio today on the pod, as it's not quite as we would like it, but hopefully it won't spoil your enjoyment too much. Liz Terry, Health Club Management Magazine editor, good friend and all-round industry guru, joins me again to interview a very special guest, the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Society of Public Health, Mr. William Roberts. Liz and I found this a fascinating discussion that made us conclude that William really does need to have a platform at some of our industry events, because the content that we covered in this short podcast doesn't do him justice. He's got so much to contribute to help us on our mission of working in collaboration with health, particularly on prevention, that he's a must-have to be a speaker at future conferences, in our opinion. The RSPH are very much involved in workforce development, and there's a fascinating paper that they released really recently that we discussed called The Unusual Suspects, Unlocking the Potential of the Wider Public Health Workforce. William gives us an insight into what that might mean for our sector. Plus, we also talk about another report the RSPCH produced about the cost of living crisis and its impact on people's health, and again discuss how our sector needs to acknowledge this impact and the effect on our customers and those we are not currently attracting. Throughout the chat, it struck me that William displays the leadership qualities that are increasingly advocated by Sport England, the Active Partnerships and others, about working across the whole system and across organisations, and how you require different qualities and approaches to be successful. Another gem, this one, and I predict you will be hearing more from William very soon. Thank you.
Mr. William Roberts, thank you very much for coming on to the Conveners podcast. I'm Andy King, my driver's assistant here.
Liz Terry from Health Club Management.
Really appreciate your time today. Dead chuffed because we got you on actually, because we weren't quite expecting you. So we've got the big hitter, the big cheese. So very, very, very pleased to have you on. So before we start, Will, can we just understand a little bit about your career today and the link with physical activity, if indeed there is one?
Yeah, so I guess like most people, I got to 18, I wanted to leave home. Not because I wanted to leave home particularly because I didn't like my parents or I wasn't happy, but you get to 18 and you want to leave home. So I looked for how was the easiest way to get away from home, and the answer was to go to university. And having not done as well on my A-levels as I wanted to, partly because I spent most of my time either playing rugby, cricket or football in my garden, I decided that I'd become a nurse, and that was by complete accident. I'd never done nursing. I'd never wanted to be a nurse. Didn't even know really what was involved in being a nurse. But I went to university studying to be a nurse. And I guess when I was at university, I fell in love with infectious communicable diseases, which is probably one of the hardest things to fall in love with.
There's got to be a joke there somewhere.
There probably is. And you know, like I'm terrible for when anybody coughs in a room saying you want to have that seen to. But this, you know, the challenge was I fell in love with communicable diseases and infectious diseases, thinking that I really liked drugs and bugs. So the idea was that people were infected by a particular pathogen, you get on well, and you can give some form of treatment to get them better. What was interesting when I did that work was you very, very quickly discovered that infectious communicable diseases has very little to do with drugs and very little to do with bugs. Now, that's not to say there isn't a bug involved or a virus involved. It is not to say that there isn't some form of treatment or management for those conditions. But what you discover when you work in something like that is effectively what you're really looking at is diseases as a positive. And so at that point, I kind of pivoted my career into public health. So I looked at the fact that all the people that are coming through my service, the people that I was providing support to and people I was caring for, all of them through pretty much no fault of their own, had found themselves unwell with something that was, in the most cases, almost entirely preventable. And so I kind of started there on my journey to prevention. I guess life got in the way between being 18 and somewhere around 27. And around 27, I was really doing a good job. I was quite senior. I got myself into sort of assistant director roles in the NHS. But I was also about 20 stone, quite overweight and quite unhappy with myself physically. So obviously part of the challenge for me was I was working an incredibly tough job, long hours. I think at that point we just had our first child and then we had some more quickly afterwards. And so the opportunities for me to be fit and healthy and for me also to do my job and be a dad and do all the things you need was actually quite tough. I think people don't talk about that enough. And so I had about another 10 years in which I continued to work incredibly long hours, incredibly difficult jobs, lots of stress. And kind of with time sort of moved away from the things I really loved, which was inequalities, social justice, and really improving people's health, and ended up more in strategy roles. One thing I'd say to anybody listening is if you're interested in strategy roles, they're a great place to learn, but you write a strategy, nobody reads it, and it often makes no difference. And I think that's really important because you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have a way to deliver that strategy and a way to work with people to make it happen, strategy is just a document sitting on a shelf. And I literally have a shelf at Hutton, and everybody can go to it and you can see some of the best strategies nobody's ever implemented. So I got to about, I was probably about 37, and I was in a really stressful national role doing big scale challenge. So big scale sort of changes to integration where to get health and social care to come together. And a couple of things that I sort of learned. Well, firstly, I needed to get fit because I was never at home, never able to stay healthy. So at that point, I started to really engage with cycling, really engage with walking, really engage with my own fitness and health. Secondly, I realised that if you want to start to make real change happen, you have to go more than just healthcare. So healthcare is great. We have some of the best healthcare services in the world. But I often say that if you get a broken leg in the UK, it's probably the best place in the world to break your leg because they'll be able to patch you up. They'll get you in hospital, get you diagnosed, and your leg will get good rehab afterwards. It's not such a good place if you want to stay healthy. Lots of the data says it's really hard to stay healthy in the UK right now, and it's getting harder. And so I realised at that point that if you want to make real difference and do really interesting stuff around prevention, you've got to go wide on healthcare. So that was a point in which I left in the NHS. And then about 2 years ago, I was appointed as Chief Executive or such of the CAS. And as an organisation, my entire setup is to try and promote better habits in the UK. We were started 100% years ago to do just that. Our role is about providing voice to people such as the fitness industry, to people that we work with to say this is what public health should do. We're also there to create a clear vision, a compelling vision of what a healthier society looks like and what things we need to do. And we're really clear that it means tackle inequalities. You need to really invest in workforce, and you need to make public health everybody's responsibility. So it's not just about the individual. And then I guess over the last 2 years, we've embarked really clearly on a big program of work to really think about how do we work to tackle inequalities, but also to do that through really harnessing the workforce. And I guess if you see my career arc, it was do something, leave home, think about prevention, move into some prevention jobs, go back into a bit of strategy, and then come back because actually in prevention's where we're really going to get a healthier, happier future to lead.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Just first of all, you're the first person that we've interviewed on the podcast who's turned up on their bike, so 10 out of 10. Actually walking the talk, or cycling the talk, whatever. So well done on that. In terms of your purpose now, what because there's something there, actually, listening to your story, it's fascinating about that you wanted, you felt that you've moved away from probably, I would say, your purpose and you moved back to it. Would that seem accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very easy to get very enamoured by your job title or get very enamoured by the trappings of success in your work. So people tell you you're great all the time, but often people also tell me I'm terrible as well. But that's a different story for a different day. But one of the things that the challenges is like, are you really happy at what you're doing? One of the things that I try to think about every day is like, am I being authentic? Am I being true to myself? And am I happy in what I'm doing? And that's one of the things we try to build in our organisation. It's really important that you talk about, walk to walk. I can't, in any credibility, go out into the outside world and talk about preventing your health, improving, people's health, tackling inequalities, making public health everyone's responsibility if I run an organisation where people aren't supported to be happy and to thrive and to work well. So this really starts with you having to be really, up to the change yourself. And I guess one of the things, thinking about the fitness industry is the minute you walk into those rooms, you see people who are fit. That's the thing, right? So there's a huge swell of integrity and authenticity in that sector. That also creates a challenge. So, because one of the things I talk about internally all the time is that, I don't always follow my advice. So I talk to staff about being healthy, about being happy, looking after themselves. And then I work long hours.
Yeah.
And I've had to make myself retired, and I should and take holidays as often as I should. And so this challenge of how do you not just make it a projected image of yourself, but an actual real image of yourself is a really important part of what you've got to be as a leader these days.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's interesting actually, again, to come on later on, possibly to the whole systemed approach that Sport England, the NHS has been taking for some time about the type of leadership that's required in that sort of context. And we're sort of walking and talking very much about that, and leading from the front and being an example to your troops.
What kind of actions is your organisation taking in pursuit of these goals?
Really simple stuff. We get the basics right. I mean, we've just been having conversations with people about how do you improve your organisation, and some of the messages are really simple. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to get your terms and conditions right. Pay the staff well. It's not hard. You have to pay the staff enough money for them to be able to live off. If you do that, they're less stressed, they're going to work harder for you, and they're going to deliver. That's not hard. So making sure you actually pay your staff decent salaries is important. That's the first thing. Second thing is make sure the terms and conditions are good. We introduce flexible working policies because we have a lot of people who have other commitments. We have a lot of people who are parents or people who've got caring commitments work for us. Got a relatively high ratio of females to males in our organisation. So making sure that things like maternity leave policies are good, making sure your basics are really strong in your policies is really important. And then the other thing we've done is actually to ensure that nobody raises their voice. It's such a minor thing, but you don't shout in my organisation. There's no need to shout. It's high performance. We'd have to deliver. We have to get good results. But we do that by actually being supported as well. And you can be high challenge and high support, and you certainly don't ever need to raise your voice to do that. And so it's getting those basics right of setting the tone for your organisation. And then for me, ensuring people have the freedom to do the things they need to do. So, our staff chose what should be the core hours for our organisation. So what are the hours everybody has to work so that we can work together effectively? And if they chose that, not me, that's really important because I know the hours I want to work, but it has to work with everybody else. We introduce things like a 9-day fortnight. So our staff work their hours over 9 days, and once every fortnight they get the 10th day as an additional day at home. They've worked their hours already. What that's allowed them to do is then go pursue things like it might be a leisure pursuit, it might be fitness, it might be a second job because they need some extra money. But what that's allowed them to do is to have the freedom to take control and to give them the choice of how they want to do it. So it's really simple, basic stuff that you do. And a lot of people have said to me, but, aren't you worried about, the cost of doing those things? What's really interesting is, having done that, our staff selection has gone through the roof. Our retention rates are better than they've ever been. When we recruit, we get more applicants than we've done to previous jobs. But really importantly, our profitability and our organisational turnover has increased because our staff work really, really hard for the time they're there. And the time they're not there, they're recharging and refreshing and getting going. And so I think getting it right is really important. And I know, in the fitness and leisure industry, ensuring your staff have good contracts and good hours was a big, big part of things, right? So you've got to get the basics right. And businesses are scared because obviously you worry about your bottom line, especially in current conditions. But actually, organisations that do these things do better. And they do better because people don't want to go and work for them, and they work harder when they're there.
That sounds like a great base, just as a springboard for your organisation to have an impact on the workers and extend the health and fitness institution in physical activity settings. So what interventions are you following to support them to improve the health of them?
So, the first thing is I think, when we talk to people, and our membership covers everything from hairdressers to the House of Lords. It's a really diverse membership. We probably have the most diverse membership of any membership organisation in the UK. Like those people in the sport and fitness sector. And I guess for those sectors, they're no different to the other people that we see working in public health jobs. You know, we often talk about the fact that most of our members are people for whom they work in public health, but there's not public health in their job title. And what we see for all those sectors is probably three things. First is they say, I love my day job, but I want to be able to do something a bit more. And we see this all the time in sports fitness, you know. I'm a personal trainer, but I want to go a bit further. I want to do nutrition. I want to do stop smoking. I want to do, you know, weight loss. You know, I want some support to do that, you know. But they don't want to stop being a PT. And that's the important thing, like, quite a lot.
They want to build all their skills.
Yeah, totally. And people all the time, if you want to go into jobs, sometimes you have to give up the thing you love. And we don't believe in that. We believe first that you've got to give people the ability to build on top of what they love to do. The second thing they say is it's really hard to get into, so they don't know where to go. Navigating is tough, right? Because there's, you know, so many different aspects to public health. You know, it's, you name it, you can find a way that might be part of the public health landscape. So it's this thing of how do we make it really clear to them the different options they've got. And then what we hear is, once I'm in there, once I've got my foot in the door, once I understand the thing I might specialise in, I want to be able to build my skills. And that doesn't always mean getting higher up or getting promoted. It might be a sideways additional build up in capacity. But you might do an introduction to nutrition, but then want to become more of a specialist in it. So how do I go from level 1 to level 4? Or what if I'm interested in taking this at a degree level? What if I want to be a specialist in a particular area? And so I think those three things are, how do we allow people to retain their career but build public health skills and be recognised for it? How do we give them a routine? And then how, once they've got the routine, do we give them ways to progress and develop their career within it? Most people want to develop over the course of their career. And for most of us, I suspect we'll have 2 or 3 careers in our lifetime. So
how do you help them become it's
So this year we've taken some really simple steps. The first one is to try and make our offer much easier to people. So we have over 90 qualifications across 7 different sectors, including sports and fitness. What we're trying to do is make that much easier and simpler for people. So either to see ways in which you can bundle different qualifications to give you an overall skill. So, for example, you could think something like, how could we have some training in menopause, some training in development and nutrition, something around mental health, and maybe something around suicide prevention. So how can we package that up and bundle that in a way that makes it easy for me to understand that, so that I can do a holistic wellbeing service? Another way might be to make what, you know, one of my colleagues talks about, the, you know, filling in the rungs on the ladder. So if you've got a level 1, how can you make it easy for you to get the level 2 qualification and move on? Once you've got level 2, what are the options for level 3? Connecting you to people who can give you those qualifications. And then similarly, working with providers. So FutureFit's a really good example. We've worked really closely with them over the years as one of our training centres. They might come to us and say, this is what we're hearing from within the sports and fitness sector, because they're the experts, not ours. And our job is then to develop qualifications that help them fill in the gaps within their system. Similarly, work was done with SimSpa to really think about what should a career look like in sports fitness, or UK Active Sport England. There's loads of bodies there who can tell us what they need. The key to us is then responding effectively to the needs of the sector rather than us defining what the sector thinks it needs.
So do you coordinate with employers, or is that need something that comes second hand to you?
I think we can. I think we see that much more as an industry piece, and we see that's a much better thing. I think the bit that isn't particularly well joined up is the join up between central government, employers and sectors. And the bit we're really pushing for now is to how do we get government to think much smarter about how to make this easier. So, for example, what could be done with apprenticeships? How can we make those apprenticeships as easy as possible for the learner, as incentivised as possible for the employer, but also useful, so that they're not so specific you end up trapped in a single employer or a single job. And so this piece about thinking what are the big national levers that would make the difference. And there's 1.5 million people who want to do public health in the UK. We did a big report on this year, and it looked at how do you, every different profession that we could consider to be within public health, when we look across those professions, 1.5 million people want to do something more in public health. A huge number of those people are within the sports and fitness sector. But what's really interesting is there's no joined up strategy for that at a national level. So we've been called into that with words and with partners to say, how do we build that national strategy in partnership with sectors and employers, and so that we can respond to the needs of the workforce, but also incentivise it for the individual, and at the same time do it in a way that will help people. Because what we don't want to do is create loads of people who are going to reach the same people they reach already. So I walk into a gym, most of the people are fit and healthy, and that's great, and it's brilliant that those people are continuing to, support their mental health, support their physical health. But actually what I want to do is get to those people who never even walk into a gym. And so what's the role of sort of the gym without walls, or taking services out to the community? How might we go out into communities to co-design things? And that's the stuff I think we can start to really do differently, and that isn't in the system at the moment.
What would you like to see happen there in terms of changing the breaks organised?
So at a national level, I do think we need a strategy. I think we need a strategy for the public health workforce as a whole. It's a workforce that's bigger than the workforce in the entire NHS put together, potentially. We have a national workforce plan for the NHS, and England don't have the same thing for public health. So I think there's a really good argument for why I'd want that. I think the second thing is we want to see a bigger join up between bits of government that have responsibility for different things. So if you think about DCMS have responsibility for the sport bit, you have then DWP responsible for getting people back into work and jobs. You've then got the Department of Education, who are responsible for education and apprenticeships, and then you've got the Department of Health, who are responsible for health. What we would want to see is those 4 or 5 different bits of government joining up to do something collectively that harnesses all those opportunities. At an employer level, I think there's a couple of things I'd want. The first thing is, I think employers to recognise their responsibility to the sector and the system. So in some sectors, not sports and leisure necessarily, but in some of the other sectors we work with, we've seen people move away from qualifications and portable, transferable skills to just creating in-house training. An idea of, well, if you do my in-house training, you'll stay working for me, almost a protectionist thing, right? What's really interesting is there's no evidence that works on Pedigree. Those people still leave. But what you then do is have somebody who goes out to another bit of the sector, now portable skills. So instead of lifting up the whole sector, it means that those people often leave because they haven't got something to go elsewhere. So, sports and leisure might lose people to, the retail sector, for example. And so we need to think about what's the sectoral responsibility of employers around qualifications and portability of qualifications. And then finally, I think I'd want them to also think about, what do you do as a sector rather than what do you do as an employer? Because I think as an employer, the best employers and the best organisations will always do good work. What we want to do is raise the whole sector up, because if you raise the whole sector up, everyone's better off. And it's seeing that kind of what's your responsibility to be KPLC rather than just what's your responsibility to your own organisation, I think is a key part in the future for me.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about whether the sectors should have some kind of dotted line links with Department of Business, just so that we could make the case for the FM weekend back and to your point about making a wider case. But in terms of this scenario that you're painting here, is this the kind of thing that you could mean, or do you need somebody in government to lead it?
I don't think it needs anyone to lead it per se. I think it's about trying to join up conversations. So what you don't need is lots of people having bilateral conversations. What you need is for a lot of people to get in the room and really just have a grown-up conversation about what is it we need to do. You need a few leaders from the sector. You need a few leaders from education. You need a few leaders from health. But you put those people in a room, and that might be central government, it might be local government. If you do this at a local level, you can do it at a regional level, you can do it at a national level. I mean, Greater Manchester, the work they've done around looking at a measure across all of GM, linking that up with the Walk-in Cycling Commissioner, linking them up with opportunities for healthcare. There's some really good examples of this where it works. What it requires is people to start having different conversations. I was talking to an actuary the other day. They're fascinating people. One person was talking about actuaries to a load of sports and leisure people, but actuaries, the minute a drug comes out, they run all the numbers on what that would do for those to life, how many more years of life this could give us, how much money this could save us, right? Yeah. what do we think that the actuary would do is physical activity?
Yeah, we've been talking about trying to get some actuarial calculations at ownership for some time.
Yeah, and just, even, I mean, that's a big question, right? That's a big, hard question to get your head around, because like, what is prevention? Which bits of prevention? But even just something like, if you said, well, what's the actuarial analysis on walking? What's the actuarial analysis on going to the gym? What's the actuarial analysis on going cycling? Doing a weekly club, just getting off your bum and moving. We know the evidence is really compelling. The question then becomes, if you turn that into an economic argument, it's really compelling. There's no silver bullets, right? There's not a single answer to anything you do that's going to change the world tomorrow in public health, certainly. It requires lots of coordinated things to happen. But the closest you're going to get to a silver bullet is probably physical activity.
What did the actuary say?
The actuary said that's a very interesting one. I'd love to know who paid for it, which I think is always the question when it comes back to these. But I think this idea of let's start to think about these things differently is I think the really important part of this. And that piece about we were asked about, who needs to lead it? I think the question is getting those people in a room together to start the conversation.
So that's the being voice.
Well, you can appoint yourself. I mean, you don't have to. You don't have to, always have somebody convening you. I mean, this is called Conveners podcast, right? So, you could just do one of these where you bring 10 of them in a room and ask them to have a conversation. But, we do a lot of this. We're doing a lot. Yeah, I mean,
I was doing that in GM shortly, to be honest, with Andy Burnham. So, cut out of the bag. Just to go back to that report, because I think it's so refreshing to read it. And actually, there's a really good video, actually, when you and some of your team talked about it and some of this. Well, we've touched on quite a bit of it. It's called The Unusual Suspects, Unlocking the Potential of the Wider Public Health Workforce. What's the motivation to do that report in the first place, Greg?
Oh, I mean, it certainly wasn't to get on the BBC Safer or to get, miles coverage in the newspapers, because it's not very sexy, right? Workforce really isn't sexy. I guess the motivation was threefold. Firstly, it's just so obvious that you've got this huge group of people who could improve the health of our nation, and we are very coordination at the moment. So why would you not try to do something that calls for that? Secondly, because everybody we talked to was saying to us the same issue. It was saying three issues: roots in, recognition of, careers we do. Right? That was just any sector you spoke to, from the retail to hospitality to sport and leisure to emergency planning. The same thing was being said. We want recognition that we're part of the workforce. We want roots into it, and we want careers within it. And then the third thing is like, who better than us, right? We have 40,000 learners come to our organisation every year. We've got 90 qualifications in something like 7 or 8 different sectors. We're the world's oldest public health body. If we can't get our stuff together to actually say this is what a great strategy for the wider public health workforce, we can't talk for all of it. There are other brilliant organisations working with different bits of public health workforce. But for the bit we're responsible for that group of people who are, the 1.5 million people who want to do public health and don't have it in their job titles, that's the group we need to represent. And so, if nothing else, we did it because, if not us, then who?
Yeah.
But I think what's been great about this is it's allowed us to start conversations. So you said, who's going to invite us to conversations? Well, actually, it's been really great because we can sit down with any sector now and say, so what do you think the pathway needs to look like in your real world? And if it's not a pathway, what might a package look like? What might a package of support for your workforce look like? And then we can start to connect that into things like, what are the big national issues we're facing as a nation? What are the big health threats we have? What are the big issues that we've got to address, from economic inactivity through to poverty, through to, regionalisation, rural areas, coastal towns, you name it. There's a way you can use workforce as a way to tackle those issues. But we do know, you pay people to do jobs, you give them careers, they lift themselves out of poverty, they'll be healthier, they'll live longer, and they'll live healthier. And so, if not now, why not? But no one's ever going to put it on the front of his son for writing that, right?
Thanks for that. And again, it's one of the things that there's been a couple of jarring things to that already. But it's I'm not pushing back at you in the slightest. What is the fitness industry? We're trying to get away from it, and yet it's short and we all know who we're talking about when we say what we think of it. But also is paying proper salaries. We've got to be honest, our sector is right out there, unfortunately. And yet we have these aspirations to really play our part in improving population health, addressing inequalities, things like that. So I'm just acknowledging that there's no easy that's no easy fix for that, but it's an issue, although both issues. But in terms of another barrier to perhaps our sector doing increasingly what we'd like to do, which is play a bigger part, do you feel that we've got the credibility that we need in order to do what we might aspire to do in this space?
I don't know is the answer. You'd have to answer that. If you don't need credibility, nobody else would think you have the credibility, is what I would say. I don't know. I think what I would say is, firstly, you have to come together with a sector. And so you've got to come together with a sector. It's a very diverse sector. And it's a very diverse provider base. It's a very diverse set of customers. So it makes it hard to come together. But I do think you can come together. There's a place for all of you. It's a broad church, but broad churches can be really big places to get broad agreement. The second thing is what is it you want? It's perfectly reasonable, and I'm always happy for people to push back on me and stuff, right? It's easy for me to say, pay my staff more. I could equally have been saying that from the job centre class if we'd gone bust. And so, as a sector, you've got to work out how you start to do that. So you've got to come up with a realistic thing that works for you, that can't be imposed on you by somebody who doesn't understand your sector. But equally, draw on others. Everyone sort of says to me, is this bleeding heart liberal, William? And that might well be true. That's not why I did this. It's not why I gave my staff better terms and conditions. I gave my staff better terms and conditions because I wanted them to work hard for me. I did it because it was a business decision based on the best interest of my business. That it also happened to be the morally right thing to do as well is really important to me. But actually, I was first and foremost thinking as a chief executive, not thinking as a person who needs social justice. Yeah. So you've got to come to this from the right place. And I think the sector can do more. The sector has got some bits to address. If you don't like fitness, and I think we all know what that means, which is there's a lot of very fit people who get fitter, or there's a lot of wealthy people who get fitter. And a lot of the critique you could level on public health is that most public health things that are good for a whole population are very bad for poor people. So, during COVID, we know that the people least likely to get a vaccination for COVID, least likely to be able to stay at home and isolate, and least likely to be able to access health services with poorer people. That's not to say things that we did in that period, like vaccination, weren't the right things to do, but we weren't conscious enough of tackling some of the issues around inequality, access, etc. But the sector can come together and start to say what it wants us to do. If it doesn't like fitness, what does it like instead? And is it that you do have fitness, but you also have something else instead? Because a lot of people do like fitness, and that's okay.
Yeah. Keep the face at work around.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's also another report that you did, I think, in December 22 about the cost of living crisis and its effects on population. Can you tell us a bit about that report? What were the outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, that was a really interesting bit of work. Effectively, it was a time where we were seeing, I think, just the really steep price increases starting to kick in. I guess what we saw were three things. We saw that whilst everybody was affected by the cost of living, it wasn't equal. So the most affected were the poorest. So again, this idea of you can have these big effects on a population level, but actually all the time you have to protect the poorest. And again, in mindset, another bleeding heart level statement. It's not. Inequality is bad for everybody. Rising prices at the lowest level is bad for everybody, because those people are less likely to be able to access food, heating, etc. They're more likely to be economically inactive. They're more likely to go off work sick. They're less likely to have sick pay allowance, really basic things. So, firstly, we saw that whilst everybody was affected by the cost of living crisis, it is most acutely affecting the poorest and making things worse. The second thing we saw was people giving up stuff. So the idea that people were having to make tough choices, government started to talk about that probably 6 to 12 months after that book came out. But actually people were making tough choices. So one of the things people were telling us was, I'm doing less physical activity as a result of it. I'm not going to the gyms often. There was some startling figure, like 1 in 10 people had started pawning items. Every month putting items into the pawn shop to be able to make ends meet. And this was before the really big hikes in gas and the oil prices that came, I think, largely in the January to March after it. And then I think what's been interesting post that report is, if you go back now, we start to see the real effects of that. So, 400,000 children in poverty, not able to feed themselves, not able to have clothing, not able to go to schools. Parents making choices between feeding themselves and feeding their children. Those are the consequences. Now, what you live with is those long-term impacts of that. And I think the thing we said at the time was, everyone thinks the cost of living crisis is an acute crisis. It's not. It's a chronic condition. Because when you cut those people into poverty and make those people have to make bad choices through no fault of their own back in 2022, the effects of that will be felt in 2042. So the children who might have done better at school will do worse. The children who might have grown to be stronger and healthier will be becoming poorer. The parents who are looking after them are more likely to get out of work, and we could see all this stuff coming. I think what's slightly depressing is 2 years down the line, a lot of the stuff we thought was going to happen has happened. I think what's interesting is we talk of sort of inflation halving and prices not going up to the same extent. Firstly, those prices are now much, much higher than they were before. Yeah. And secondly, people have less money in their pockets. And, that's tough because they're going to spend it in less places. And what's been really interesting is part of why that's such a big challenge for us in the UK is because we haven't seen wage growth over the last decade. So why do I say pay people well? It's because we don't see the same level of wage growth. So, the prices here aren't that different from the States, the salaries are. The prices here aren't that different to, say, in Germany, but the salaries are. And that's the challenge, is that we haven't grown at the same rate in which we incurred cost. And so we now have an issue that living standards are reversing, life expectancy is dropping, all due to preventable things. Yeah. And if we want to get people back into doing more physical activity and want to get people moving, that requires systemic change and it requires environmental change. It doesn't require individual change, because it's not that people are choosing not to do it because they're lazy. They're choosing not to do it because both combination of it's inaccessible, they don't feel safe, and they don't have money now to afford it. It was hard enough getting people to do physical activity, pre-cost of living, but now when they can't put their hands in their pocket to pay anything towards that, and the prices for the providers have gone up, so they've had to put their prices up double whammy, and that's your challenge you face in mind.
Yeah, thanks for answering that. I'd just say, sort of, you touched on it a bit there as well. So the Sport England are investing heavily into the whole systems approach and place-based approach and things like that, and the NHS have been doing so for some time, haven't they? And you're, I think throughout this chat, you sort of said about collaborating and working together and type of leadership required. What's your thoughts on that investment to supporting? There's also followed the local pilots where there's been some evaluation of those. There's some evidence that people are more active and recovering from the pandemic in those local pilots where the whole system approach was being taken. What's your approach to the whole system approach? Do you think that's the right thing to do from what you can see? Is it the way forward from your experience, from the way you sit? What's your thoughts?
It's one of the ways forward. I mean, there's lots of things you've got to do. There's never any one single answer where anyone tell you that. I think what Sport England are doing is really good and just really brave. I think, bravery should be recognised, and it was a very big change for them. I know the team there, when they, came out with uniting the movement, it was a really big change for them. I think they did a really good job as an organisation during the pandemic. I think the way in which they pivoted their work and looked at agile working was really, really impressive. And particularly agile working with partners and getting money out the door to partners to keep things going. That was really good. I love the work they're doing on data and the Open Data Initiative. So they've got I think the whole systems work. I mean, it depends what you want to call it. I think for me, I think local is important. I think it has to be local and it has to work at a local level. It can't be imposed nationally. So I really like the fact that they've got different approaches. I think we shouldn't see it as the solution. We should see it part of the solution and part of the systems working. And I think my experience personally of doing big scale change and working on integration nationally is it's about people. And so I suspect if you go to a lot of the bases, there'll be some amazing people in the leisure and fitness sector, there'll be some amazing people in the NHS, there'll be some amazing people in social care and local government, there'll be some amazing people in sport, and there'll be some brilliant community organisers in most places. I think if you want to make it work, 3 things have to happen. Firstly, you have to all agree what your local vision is for that, and all pushing roughly in the same direction. That doesn't mean you will have to be all the same on everything, but you do have to have roughly all swimming in a direction like a Shoreditch ditch. The second thing I think you've got to then have is you've got to really have some support. This does require some money. And it's a bit of a dirty thing to say because everyone sort of says there's no money and everyone's very finding it hard, but you do need a bit of money. And one of the things we shouldn't underestimate is how much having Sport England funding into those catalyse those relationships, because it takes away the difficult conversation about who puts money in the pot, which is important to get beyond in the first place. And then the third thing is, it's all about people, right? So every time that works, there's at least one amazing figurehead, inspirational leader. And then there's 3 types of people. There's bridges, so people who can build bridges between different parts of the system, because we all speak different languages and don't understand each other and come from different positions and think we're all the most important people. So there's people who can bridge between 2 worlds. There's brokers, so people who can negotiate between the different parties, because what happens in the room is often different to what happens outside the room, and those brokers are great at going away, having quiet conversations to get everybody roughly together and so on. And then the third thing is translators, and they're people who are bilingual, trilingual, quadrilingual, if you like. They speak different languages, and there's really simple things that, fitness means different things to different people. So you need somebody who understands that, because if you blunder in and start talking about fitness and when what actually you mean is activity versus movement versus, cardio, you name it, then you've got a problem. So for me, those 3 things exist in places where it works. I think in the best of those places that you've described, you can pretty much find all those things exist.
Yeah, that's amazing. Have you personally ever been trained in systems leadership?
So I did it for a while in one of our jobs. You can get very excited about all this training stuff. Some of this is just common sense, right? And actually, it's still the right thing. Most of the time, do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I come back to this with leaders, that if you're a leader, what matters is that you do what you say. It matters that you're authentic, that people can actually see that you mean it. And it matters that you do the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing is horrible and it isn't nice and it's not, you don't enjoy it. But most of the time it's about doing the right thing. None of this is particularly complicated, right? You've got an amazing leisure facility. I've got a whole load of staff. We've got a big backlog. Why don't we put those 3 things together and see what we can design? And let's talk to the community first before we design something, because they probably know whether they like it or not and whether they're going to go there or not. Oh, look, you've got a massive, community hall and some incredible people trained in motivational, speaking. And yes, they're doing, fitness at the moment, but actually, if we just move them slightly sideways, we could help you on some things. It's not rocket science. And there's people who spend millions of pounds thinking about systems thinking. Most of this is common sense, doing the right thing, just being half decent with your partners. Yeah. We could make this into all sorts of exciting things. I'm sure we can come up with some models that we can sell for billions of pounds. But fundamentally, just, be decent human being and listen to people like big ears, small mouths.
Does that resonate with you in terms of Jimena?
Yeah, it does. I mean, in a number of ways, to be honest. I think very quickly, there's some system leadership training that's been going across in gym for some years now. And I was tuning into it and thinking, this sounds fantastic, but I don't really understand what it means to us. It wasn't translatable. So we created our own transformational leadership program with John in particular, but others feeding into it to try and distill it. What does it actually mean? If you're a general manager of a leisure centre, That's why we focused our efforts. What does it actually mean? What do we want them to think about differently? What do we want them to behave differently on? And that's been incredibly successful in terms of the way that it's achieved different results. So yeah, it's fascinating to hear. And it's really nice actually to not be listening to somebody who's talking in a theoretical way about some of these things, but you've just interspersed your answers all throughout the interview with elements of systems leadership, as I understand it. It's been great, cumulative.
Yeah, practical advice actually has a deep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that what it's all about? I mean, the example you've just given there is really practical. It's like, I listen to all this stuff, it kind of makes sense, but I ain't going to fly with a leisure centre manager. So what I need to do is put it in leisure centre manager language, that's a translator.
Yeah.
I also need to go back to the people at the centre who spent quite a long time on this training and not say the training's rubbish, because it isn't, it's really good, but I need to say that we just need to do something slightly different here, and so that's brokerage.
Yeah.
And then there's a bit about once you've got your leisure centre manager working really effectively on systems leadership, and you've got in person over here who's really good with systems leadership, you then bring them together and you bridge and you go, you two should have a conversation. Tell you what, why don't you come and have coffee and we'll have a chat about what we could do together. That isn't anything other than just common sense, right? You have to make it sexy, right?
If you're an extrovert, you might find that kind of quite straightforward, but if you're an introvert, not so much really. So this is about personality type, isn't it?
It is, and also, I mean, back into it, but I think it's also being allowed that time to do that and to have make those connections and to think in that way when the day job and KPIs are certain to someone who's just driving business as such.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you have to focus on your core. Fundamentally, the thing you've got to say to that leisure centre manager is, you've got to run a good leisure centre, right? Yeah. That's their core job. Yeah. Too often, we bring in change programmes and try to make that their core job. Yeah. So firstly, you've got to give them time to do their core job. Then you've got to give them time to think. So I did a lovely webinar last week with a public health leader, and we were having a conversation about it, and I said, on a Monday I write a list of the things I'm trying to achieve in the long term, and on a Friday I have half an hour to come back and say, have I done it? And it is that thing of you've got to create time. I have time in my diary, and I explicitly make my diary available to every staff member to see that I have time for thinking, and it says thinking time. And that means I'm explicitly giving permission to every staff member in my organisation to have thinking time. And so you've got to create those conditions. Yeah. You've got to create the conditions in which effectively things can change. It doesn't change just by writing the strategy. It's back to the strategy thing. I can write the most beautiful strategy, but I don't create the conditions, it'll just whip it and die.
See, there you go again, creating the conditions. That's another one. That's of it. Right, we've run out of time, but we've got some quick card questions for you. And the first one is, what would you wish an incoming government to do? But I also know you published the election priorities and mental health as well funded. So do you want to touch on that briefly?
Very briefly, focus on inequalities, look to tackle them. They're good for everybody, not just for the poor. Secondly, really invest in the wider public health workforce. It's there, it's ready, it wants to do this, but it needs a little bit of lava strategy and a small amount of investment and joining up of the system. Thirdly, we think getting people back into work and keeping people in work is really, really important. If I can say a fourth thing, which is in the inequalities bit, just get rid of the two-child tax credit. It is just terrible. It keeps children in poverty. All the evidence says if you do that, you alleviate poverty for 400,000 children. You put $3,500 in every parent's pocket for their child, and they spend that money on fresh food, fresh veg, not on cigarettes, not on tobacco, not on alcohol. It's a great thing to do, and any incoming government should do that as day one, because it is the most powerful thing you could do to protect the health of our future children. Thank you.
Do you think we can reverse some of this health and this wealth inequality that we've seen creeping in?
Yes.
Stubbornly? How would we do that?
You can do that by thinking about how you get everybody to do their bit. You can do that by actually thinking about how you look at where you spend your money. My organisation's 160 years old and was started by Victorian philanthropy. Victorian philanthropy came about because there was too much money concentrated in one place. People were too sick to go to work. Children were being born unhealthy and staying unhealthy. And so actually those Victorian philanthropists who had too much money, the money wasn't moving around the system, then had to then reinvest their money through philanthropy into large-scale infrastructure building projects. They built homes, they built jobs, they built work, they built railways, they built organisations like mine. We're back at those points where we need to think about that. There is definitely a point for redistribution. I'm not talking about some sort of Trotskyite socialist ideal. I'm talking about the idea of actually having a healthy workforce. You could pay your staff better and put money back into them. That money goes back into those people's pockets. They tend to spend it locally. They also tend to pay it back in tax revenue as well and use less public service. There are ways to do it, but you've got to rebuild infrastructure in the UK to do that. I mean, I could spend days on this. I'm a nurse, not an economist, so it's probably not the time to do that. But there's something interesting in there about there are ways to do it, and there are ways to do it really effectively. It doesn't require everybody to have to be poor. The one thing money has to keep doing if you're going to have a growth economy is keep moving. When money stops moving, that's when it's a problem for the economy.
Thank you very much.
Last one. I'm going to skip over the GLP-1. We currently our sector currently sits in the DCMS, and there's some discussion about whether that's the right place for us to be. We could be in health, we could be in oldies, we could be, as Kim Better says, stay in DCMS but be across all of those elements. What's your thoughts?
So a wise man once said, the only thing worse than the current structures you've got is a reorganisation of the current structures you've got. Never call for a reorganisation. I think the opportunity is twofold. I think firstly, make physical activity and movement across government priority would be a really interesting thing to call for as a sector. Secondly, get your sector together so that you can decide what it is you think the government should do for you, and they're much more likely to do it there.
We'll leave it there. That's a mic drop over.
Thank you very much, Will.
Will, fantastic. Thank you very much.